Hi everyone, welcome back. The Hofri list is finished. So in this video I want to cover the changes that were made since last time and also cover the deck as a whole in terms of how to play it. So one thing I want to say is that this deck is one of the most complex decks I've ever built, and the average commander player that I see online probably could not pilot this deck effectively. And so if you pick up this deck and you're like, well, I played it and it didn't seem to do anything, um, a large part of that might be because you didn't read the primer and actually follow the mulligan rules properly, which are very, very important. There are a lot of hands that you just can't keep, even if they are technically playable. The other one is there are many lines in this deck, and if you don't understand those lines or you don't see them, then this deck will be very difficult to play. So to get on with the changes, I cut most of the win more style cards. So I'll start with the Anointed Procession and then the two big spirit creatures from Neon Dynasty. The Anointed Procession is a card that's only good if you are already winning or um, you are sort of at on par with the rest of the table. And these sorts of cards are not very good when behind, where something like Direfleet Daredevil helps fix the fact that we are in Boros. Um, a color combination that just isn't that good, at least compared to, say, black and blue and green. And so being able to utilize an instant or sorcery from our opponent's graveyards is huge, especially if it's something like a demonic tutor. And so that has been a cut that has worked out really well for me. The other one has been a snow-covered mountain for Valakut Awakening. So for those of you who have played competitive Commander and you're used to cutting lots of lands, you can probably agree with me that uh, it is better to mulligan and go down to 6, sometimes even 5, to hit your mulligan targets. And again, our mulligan targets, our mulligan requirements are listed out in the primer of what lands you can keep, and or not lands, what hands you can keep and what you cannot, and that pretty much anything else has to be pitched back. And that you would, it is better to go to 6 or even 5 if necessary, so that you get a desired opening hand rather than to have enough lands to hit all your land drops. Um, Tuned decks do not need to hit all of their land drops each turn. You only need to hit enough mana to sufficiently enact your game plan. And so after your fifth land, maybe sixth land, you actually don't want to be drawing lands in most cases. Especially not this deck. You have enough recursion. You can pitch your commander if he's killed back into the graveyard instead of the command zone, and you're just fine sitting at 5 mana, possibly 6, just because you have things like sack outlets that generate mana, and you have recursion pieces. So again, you do not need to hit all your land drops if you are of that mindset that flooding out on lands and continuing to play lands 8, 9, and 10 throughout the game are good. I think that's something you want to overcome first, kind of wrap around in your head in order to understand how to play a deck that is built to be tight and consistent and strong in a wide variety of situations. So we did cut a land for Valakut Awakening, which still kind of is a pseudo land. It can be played as a land if necessary, but I talk about in the primer how we are in uh, an aristocrats deck, and all decks that have many moving pieces are subject to drawing the wrong side of the deck. So there could be games where even if you mulligan for a hand that meets one of the mulligan requirements, you end up drawing nothing but your lands or your artifacts and none of these value creatures. It's unlikely. Over a third of the deck is creatures, but it is possible still flood out on lands even though we've gone down to 34 and one of the MFDCs or MTFCs. For that reason, Valakut Awakening does a lot of work in this deck, and you'll actually see in the first replay that I showcase, which is should be the video right after this one, that Valakut Awakening was crucial in that game, allowing us to essentially pitch a hand of 4 or 5 lands that we had drawn off of thanks to Skullclamp. Another thing was Mother Runes for Goblin Engineer. We don't need to protect Hofri in this list. Most of the win cons here do not require Hofri to be in play. There are some that do allow you to utilize Hofri. There are some non-winning combos that allow you to, again, if you want to wipe the board, and you don't have Hofri in play, you can still do it with the False Prophet. You just don't create a differential board wipe, you just create a regular board wipe. Of course, if you want to get every creature in your graveyard back into play, you do need Hofri in play for the Mistmoon Griffin combo here. But again, in terms of killing the table, you do not need Hofri in play. This list is not built so that it requires the commander in play to function or even to do well. So, Mother Runes was cut for Goblin Engineer. I did like the Mother Runes, but it was more central to if you're trying to play a beatdown plan where you're trying to protect a certain creature. So, like, let's say if you look at my Jetmare list, the reason why Mother Runes and Giver Runes is in that list is because the turn that you're going to Alpha Strike with Jetmare, you need to make sure that Jetmare does not die during combat, because that's a huge blowout for you if they kill Jetmare during the combat damage step, or before blocks or something like that. This deck doesn't really function like that. We're not sitting here like, okay, we need to protect Hofri no matter what. This deck can function perfectly fine without Hofri. And so instead of Mother Runes, I switched it out for a consistency piece like Goblin Engineer. Goblin Engineer is very good for getting Altar of Dementia when the win con sack outlets into the graveyard. It can also get your Skull Clamp, which is, again, Skull Clamp is literally so good in this deck that we run Stoneforge Mystic solely for that purpose, even though Stoneforge Mystic cannot hit any other targets in this deck other than the Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is literally so good in this deck that we run Stoneforge Mystic. And you'll see that in both of the replays, or both of the videos I have after this one that showcase replays of this deck in action. Yeah, we got rid of Fell on the Third Path for Path to Exile. That's just because we put in Mistmoon Griffin. Again, Mistmoon Griffin is used in both a kill combo and also a combo that basically gets you every creature in your graveyard back into play. So we use Mistmoon Griffin instead of Feldon. It's just a better combo piece in the deck. But we replaced Feldon specifically for Path to Exile. The main reason is I felt like we needed a second single target creature hoser, because there are games where an opponent would have a Scavenging Ooze or a Lion Sash, and I didn't have a way to deal with them. So now we do run a lot of creature removal. We look at the types and tags. We have 11 in here, including the Path to Exile. Previously we had 10. Some of it is not actually able to hit, like a Scavenging Ooze or Lion Sash after it gets big. And I wanted more ways to actually hit that sort of creature after it's already been used and kind of gotten out of Hellish Norn range. I think I've talked about getting rid of the two big spirits already from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So we have Kami False Hope and Vesper Lark. Vesper Lark works with a good number of creatures in our deck, so I don't think I need to really explain it. And then Kami False Hope does several things. One is against heavy Cascade decks that generate a big board that can beat you down, like Maelstrom Wanderer. Kami the False Hope encourages the Maelstrom Wanderer player to attack someone else. It gets a lot of pressure off of you. With Hofri Ghostforge in play, you essentially can prevent combat damage from two players. It's also something that can be skull clamped for value if it ends up being dead. But either way, Kami False Hope creates interesting board situations where opponents may decide not to attack you with their giant board just because it would feel like a waste, and they want to do something that's impactful. So the Kami has actually been pretty good from my experience. Let's see what else. We cut Treasure Keeper for Magus of the Moon, right? So Magus of the Moon, not much to talk about here. We are almost solely a mono white deck, but most of our fetch lands are going to be getting some kind of snow-covered plains or snow-covered mountain. Magus of the Moon doesn't really hurt us that much, but it's really good in the mid game. So a lot of times, by the time I see Magus of the Moon, the opponent's already built a board. But because in high power pods, people are board wiping and destroying each other's stuff all the time, Magus of the Moon ends up being a crucial mid-game piece after the board has been wiped, whether Magus of the Moon is in our hand or in the graveyard. Sometimes we recur from the graveyard, but when the board has been reset and players are rebuilding, Magus of the Moon has been essential in just slowing down their rebuild by hosing all their non-basic lands. And so I've been really impressed with Magus of the Moon in the test games I've played. I think I already talked about Mistmoon Griffin. We cut the Venerable Warsinger for it, and that's largely just because there were many games where the Venerable Warsinger didn't wasn't able to swing anything against enemy decks that are playing a good number of creatures that can block the Venerable Warsinger. It just felt dead. It was only good against like Spellslinger decks or decks that otherwise weren't going big on creatures. And I felt that there are two main decks that do go wide with creatures for us to really get value of the Venerable Warsinger. Okay, so now let's talk about the deck. I hinted at this before, but essentially uh, the game plan has to be followed. So there are many hands in this deck that are technically playable. However, you're probably going to have a awful experience and not do well with this deck if you don't actually follow the Mulligan guidelines here. Just because a hand is technically playable does not mean it is keepable, and I recommend that you stick to these guidelines. Um, just because this is a very difficult deck to pilot. There are many, many lines, and if you struggle to play this deck, it will ultimately come down to not being able to see the lines, not keeping uh, a hand that follows these mulligan rules, which again, I've tested and iterated these mulligan rules over 4.5 weeks to make sure that I can put together something that allows you to play with an amount of consistency that ensures that you're always playing pretty much every game you play. Um, you never want to be in a situation, regardless of whatever commander deck you're playing, where you don't really feel like you're playing the game, like you're just completely out of it. This deck does not have that problem, but it can have that problem if you don't follow the Mulligan guidelines. So you want to follow these, and then your first priority is to establish some sort of card draw or card advantage engine. In most cases, that is Skull Clamp. We have a lot of ways to tutor Skull Clamp and get it into play. Skull Clamp is the MVP draw engine in this deck. Outside of that, we can utilize Hofri and a sack outlet to essentially get double ETBs out of our creatures. Again, check the game replays in the next two videos following this one to kind of see how the deck works in that aspect. And then finally, the win con. So once you have your card draw or some sort of card advantage engine set up, there are essentially two ways this deck is steering toward in terms of winning. The first is a beatdown plan. If you draw Elesh Norn or have some way to get Elesh Norn out of the graveyard, if it was milled, then you can beat down with your creatures. It is a viable plan and way to kill our opponents. The reason why I don't include other, good stuff style creatures is because again, even in the games where I was running A of the Dawn Sky and Atsushi, sure, they're 5/4 and 4/4 flyers, but that's honestly not good if you're not hosing your opponent's creatures, and that's why I've essentially reduced it down to if you see Elesh Norn, you can go on a beatdown plan. If you don't see Elesh Norn, your goal is to control the board. I mean, you're gonna be doing that regardless because there's so many creatures in this deck that also uh, function as both value and interaction. But you're gonna be controlling the board, interacting with your opponents while you dig for one of these winning combos that will kill the table. And so that's essentially the deck. Check out the replays to follow in the next two videos, just to see how the deck functions and get a feel for the lines of play, and also kind of see how it fares up against enemy decks of different kinds.